Hey everyone, it's Amy Lynn Durham, and you're listening to Create Magic at Work. Create Magic at Work is on a mission to equip senior leaders with tools they need to be a true servant leader and actually understand what that means. Improve employee engagement, retain top talent, and transform your workplace culture to have less stress and drama. So let's start making magic. Welcome back to the Create Magic at Work podcast. I'm super excited today because I have a special guest joining us that I really wanted to have on the show. Her name is Valerie Hope. And for the past 20 years, Valerie's career has taken her to many different countries and to work with people of many cultures. She's worked for Up With People, the International Leadership Program, the Dallas Regional Chamber of Commerce, and Hyatt Corporation in roles focused on public relations, training, recruitment, and leadership development. In 2018, she launched into entrepreneurship as the CEO of her company, Connect to Joy. Her thought-provoking questions and unique strategies empower people from all walks of life, and her group workshops and one-on-one sessions are designed to go beyond concepts and data points and to shine a light on what has heart and meaning. Perfect guest for Create Magic at Work. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you, Amy Lynn.
So for everyone listening, I met Valerie through the UC Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute through some other connections that we had there. And we've just sort of stayed connected ever since because we have similar work as far as bringing heart and human connection to people and to the workplace. So Valerie, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that and your mission with that?
My mission with that? Well, I think the one thing I could say to elaborate is that everything I do, I don't know if everything, but the things that I do that comprise my profession has always, those things have always been there. I've always been curious about people. I've always wanted to have meaningful conversations. I don't like small talk. And I'm not introverted. I'm very extroverted. I can talk to anybody, but get ready to go deep. And so I've always found it really fulfilling to understand where somebody is coming from, their point of view, their perspective. That gives me offers them some grace. I'm not as judgmental. So it's been a really great skill to apply in my career. But more importantly, this is part of who I am. So my career really feeds my soul and also gives me an opportunity to build the same kind of skill sets that I would love to use and I currently use in my personal relationships. So I want to talk about what has heart meaning, what's important to somebody, understand who they are and what they're about.
Yeah. And can you maybe, I don't know if you want to go back this far, but your experience at Hyatt or in other positions, you say you're not the person for small talk per se, but can you give us an example of what would be a deep connection you would have with an employee or a colleague that would maybe bring a little bit more than, oh, it's going to rain today, or discussion about the weather or something like that?
Don't get me wrong. We did talk about the weather. Living in Texas for 20 years, it is a subject of conversation. The example that comes to mind was, I'll start with Up With People was something I did right out of college. It's an organization that takes young people, college age, a young person between 18 and 25 or so. And we traveled internationally. We lived with host families when we traveled. And part of the program was to do community service, was to not only live with these host families, but also work and live with our fellow cohort, which generally comprised of 100, 130 people from up to 30 different countries at times. And so I remember specifically when we went to host families, often we averaged maybe about 4 days, 3 days, 4 days in someone's home. If I was in someone's home in a different country, I had that much time to get to know them. And then we still had other activities. So sometimes we had even less than 3 or 4 days. We maybe had just hours or a few meals that we were spending with them. And so part of it was just getting to the heart of who people are and what was meaningful to them. Staying in someone's home. And this was This happened to me in Venezuela. We actually didn't have a specific host family. We were staying in a hotel, but the hotel staff became our friends. The people that we spent time with and ate breakfast with, to anywhere from Venezuela to Estonia or Canada or all over the US. And it's been really rewarding to know that in a very short period of time, I could connect in a meaningful way with someone. So I think that was probably the most, I don't know, challenging was the word, but that's where it showed up the most, because in the 5 years I worked for that organization, I lived with like 400 host families.
Wow.
So there were like tons of people, and on a regular basis, changing from family to family. And then in Hyatt, you asked, one example comes to mind. I was working in the human resources department. At the time, I started as a training manager. And we had these service standards that we were making sure that everyone in our hotels knew by heart and could recite them. It was almost like they had to be certified with these particular service standards. And we had several employees who worked specifically in our housekeeping department and also our dishwashing department who had a really difficult time memorizing them. And I speak Spanish because I'm originally from the Republic of Panama. So I got into a conversation once with one of the gentlemen that worked in the dishwashing room, and I asked him, he was from El Salvador, and I asked him a little bit about what was going on. He was very upset and very stressed about having to memorize these standards. He didn't think it was fair. They'd never had to. They don't even deal with guests. Why is our department being held accountable for this? And so I started asking him some questions. I don't even remember what I said or what specific questions, but I came to understand that he and many of his colleagues, especially those from El Salvador, had immigrated to the U.S. when they were very young because of the civil war that was happening in Central America at the time. And during that time, many of them were kept away from school because it was dangerous to go to school. They could be killed. And so that meant that many of them had nothing more than a grade school level. And then they were in the U.S. through amnesty programs. And so it was illiteracy that was at the source of his stress, of then having to be held accountable to memorize something that he couldn't even read, even in Spanish. And so out of that, I created, this was back in the day when they had cassettes. We were transitioning to CDs, but I remember recording them in Spanish, and so they could listen and memorize them. So I mean, that's a very specific example, but sometimes just understanding a little bit below, it wasn't a huge history lesson, but enough below the surface to see that there was something that I could do to serve and support.
It's so important and such a great story to share, because it highlights what, I know your values and my values are, which is stay curious, approach situations without blame and judgment. And you uncovered, and when we talk about SQ, spiritual intelligence, that is being a wise and effective change agent. You didn't move to a quick fix. You were looking for the underlying problem. And you literally made a systemic change by going and making that cassette so they could listen to it. And that's such a great example to share with everyone as a leader.
Thank you.
I'm curious. Yes, thank you for sharing that with everyone, because it just highlights, how can we get creative? How can we make space to do these creative things? Well, the first step is I stay curious and I ask meaningful questions, right? And then we move to that creative space. So I love that story. I want to know what your view on mistakes in the workplace
Mistakes
is. And yes, mistakes. And if you've ever, I'm just thinking about the stories you've shared and a little bit of what your leadership, has entailed. And so I'm curious what your view on mistakes in the workplace is, or if you've ever been involved in a change effort that's failed.
Oh, yes. I was probably at the helm of some of those. I've made plenty of mistakes in the workplace. So, gosh, my take on mistakes, I mean, are you talking in general or specifically as it relates to change?
However you want to take it.
However I want to take it. Well, one thing that I would say I learned early on Well, I shouldn't say early on because it was trial by fire oftentimes. So there was really no time involved. It was more just, it was hard to be in pain for so long. I'll talk about Hyatt again because that's what came to mind. And I spent 14 years working for Hyatt, very long career, and I did quite a bit. I remember when I transitioned into the corporate team, I was a regional director of learning. And one of my first trips, we were in the process of bringing about a coaching culture that was part of our initiative, and were sent out to different hotels around our particular region to do some training with managers, really connect with the leaders of that property and support them in creating whatever resources or standards so that what we taught them could be sticky, right? And would be sustainable. Well, it was one of my first visits. And I remember I had this whole checklist of this is how it's going to go. And this is what we have to do. And I went in pretty strict. These are the standards and this is what we're requesting. And there was no room for veering off or for adapting anything to a particular location. And I remember a few weeks afterwards having my review, my quarterly review with my boss. And in a conversation during the review, he pulled out a series of evaluations. And in evaluation, I saw from that same hotel, that first one, how inflexible and uncooperative, and I don't even know the other words, but it was confronting because where I thought I was being very professional and very polished and going in to do my job, and I'm in corporate now, so this is what corporate people do, came off completely opposite of who I claimed to be in the workplace, which was somebody that was, like you said, creative and connected and curious. And I did none of those things. Traded curiosity, connection, and creativity for compliance. And I remember in that conversation with my boss, he was like, let's talk about this. What's going on here? And here's the thing. It wasn't consistent throughout all the evaluations we reviewed, just a few of them. And I realized that, these are the places where I didn't take the time to really get to know the people. Or these are the places where I had some judgments before going in. Oh, this is a difficult property, or this one is not, they like to get away with stuff. I had something about them, some judgment that got in the way of really connecting or really being open enough to get curious. And so, yeah, I learned definitely it was a huge mistake, primarily because my boss said, this can't happen if you hope to keep this job for long. He was a lot more gracious than that when he said it, but essentially that was the message. I learned that even in those roles, even with the level of responsibility that I had, my job was really to support people. I wasn't there to check things off a list and be a compliance officer by any means. So that's the thing that comes to mind about mistakes. I learned a great lesson there. And, it's funny, Amy, because it seems so simple to say, be curious and connected and creative. But when it seems like everything in the environment is pulling for something, because it seems kind of soft, right? It doesn't seem like efficient or that it might be effective. It's more of a long game. But the more I embraced that part of me, which was so natural already, the better results I got. The more compliant people were, ironically, because they were willing to go above and beyond sometimes in places and ways that were uncomfortable, just because I was much more connected to them and they knew that I had their back, as opposed to when I was just looking over their shoulder, making sure they had done everything they were supposed to do, and I was going to report them if they didn't. That sort of approach did not work.
And it's so interesting to me, just to comment on that, when we enter the workforce, and get these leadership positions in the beginning, I know we think we're supposed to act in some certain way, and it's the system we get into, and the way that we're acting is not authentic, and it's a check the box kind of behavior. And it was so great that you got that feedback, because oftentimes, mistakes, especially when we talk about spiritual intelligence, mistakes lead to innovation. They lead to inspiration. You can live on the edge of chaos and have all these new creations. And to me, what you're saying, just to echo back, is when I was more my authentic self of who I thought I was, and when I lived in alignment with that, is when I started getting real connection in the workplace and, oh, by the way, getting real results.
Exactly.
So I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on the podcast is because you recently gave a keynote about bringing joy to diversity. And I just thought this was so amazing and so in line with Create Magic at Work, because diversity in the workplace can be a very explosive topic at times. And so I would just love for you to share. I mean, obviously you can't give your whole keynote during the podcast, but what sparked you to stand up and talk about bringing joy to this type of initiative? And can you just enlighten the audience on that?
Yes, absolutely. We'll share. I don't know how much of it will enlighten the audience. But, going back to what you mentioned earlier is really this idea of authenticity that was pushing me along to bring that message out. So what was funny is a year and a half or so ago, when everything that was, things are still very tense when we talk about racial justice, especially here in the US, but all over the world, really. I remember a couple of organizations reached out to me and asked me specifically for a type of training. Implicit bias, that was what they were asking. Hey, do you do any training on implicit bias or unconscious bias? And I have done so in the past. And I was never quite enrolled in that it was sufficient to have that particular training. And it wasn't for me to give. Like I had done it and I got it and I knew the importance of it in the organizational context, but it wasn't like my thing. And I have my own business. And the reason I have my own business is because I can do things my way. And so, but I just remember thinking, no, that's not it. That's not what you want. And the request actually prompted me to start asking questions. So I got curious. And as I got curious, I discovered that the request was born out of a sense of responsibility for doing something and providing something for the employees that they thought would be helpful. But at the root was that there were employees that were experiencing a level of trauma because of everything that was going on in the world. George Floyd had just been murdered. There were all sorts of demonstrations and protests happening all over the country, all over the world. Everything that was happening on social media. People were getting called out for all sorts of systemic racism. And there's so much going on. There was a lot of pain. And as I was speaking to some of these leaders, I realized that they were applying a strategy to address a symptom. They weren't really addressing the root cause. But I didn't know what to do. So truth be told, at that moment, I was just like, I asked really good questions and I got to the bottom of it. So I thought, and then I was like, sorry, can't really help you. I don't have anything. But I don't think that is it. I think maybe having a conversation with your team could provide you with the path forward. And I left it at that. But kind of in the back of my mind, for months after that, I had this just feeling that, okay, I can't just say no. I have to be able to provide something. But I wanted it to be something that aligned with who I am, what I believe about the world, that aligns with my own values and my own style. And I'm very, very keen to say that I don't want to, or didn't and don't want to diminish by any way, shape, or form any of the efforts or any of the training or any of the workshops or any of the content that organizations are using to educate and further this conversation in their organizations. I just needed something that was aligned with who I am and what I thought would be helpful. And so that particular talk was born out of that moment. And it took me several months and I got some great education in speech writing. I took a course actually that was great in helping me format and really explore my thoughts and stories that I wanted to share. And so proud. I'm really, really proud of what came out of all that effort. And there's still more to come. It's just, I find it so aligned. And when it's so aligned, it's not only fulfilling on a personal level, but I also realize how much it connects with other people, right? Just because it's so authentic to me.
Yeah. So it's almost like a lifelong journey, having the courage to show up as your authentic self. And I was just having this discussion, doing an SQ21 debrief with another leader where he was saying, you know what, I'm taking off the mask. And we were talking about every day how we decide to put these different masks on, or think about the individuals that feel like they have to put a mask on because they can't be their authentic self in the workplace. And what is that doing to our innovation, to our connecting with each other, to our productivity? You're going to have disengaged employees, right? But I'm going, but anyways, I'm going off on a tangent, but because you helped me think of so many different things.
What does success look like for you? What are 3 courageous things you can do for your work and your career? What are you proud of that you've already accomplished? Take a moment to access your own internal wisdom using the journal prompt cards I created. They invite you to reflect about different themes regarding your work and your career. A deck of 33 beautiful gloss stock cards, and each card contains an affirmation and 2 questions for you to write out your thoughts. You can utilize them virtually, in a group, or individually to create a workplace where employees are highly engaged with less drama and stress. And now they're available in a journal book version. Go to createmagicatwork.net/tools today and get your own deck of journal prompt cards or the newly released Create Magic at Work, the journal. Sending magic your way.
When you talked about addressing a symptom rather than the underlying cause, I mean, you are hitting, I'm on this theme this week of, it's one of the SQ skills in the 4th quadrant. It's being a wise and effective change agent. And it just keeps coming up. You know, you don't just go for the quick fix. That's one of the trainings in SQ for being a wise and effective change agent. You look for the underlying causes and you dig and you fix the root cause so you can overhaul the system if it's toxic, or, you know, even if it's just not working right. It could be something simple. So I'm curious if you can share maybe just one example that you feel like where organizations are trying to just fix the symptom rather than the underlying cause when we talk about bringing joy to diversity.
Well, the best way I can say it is, and again, I'm very sensitive to that. There's so much work being done in this particular topic, and this particular time in history it's significant. So I don't want to undermine any of that. And I don't know all the things that are being done, right? It's not like I have a whole list of all of the trainings and everything that people have put together. But one of the things that have always worked for me, and, you know, I kind of gave you a sense of who I am. I'm an immigrant. We immigrated to the U.S. when I was 9 years old. I learned to speak English, but, you know, by age 10. My dad was in the military, so we moved around quite a bit once we immigrated to the States. And then also in college, I was surrounded by people that were from different countries and cultures and ethnicities. And that's where I felt I fit best. After college, I traveled with people, like I mentioned, for 5 years, literally living out of a suitcase, 400 host families. And, I was often the only Black person that many people had seen, or much less had in their home, slept in their bed, ate at their table. And so for me, I could sense, and I'd be hard pressed to really give you like a concrete, this was the moment. But I could sense that some of the experiences that I had that informed how I moved in the world, and the experiences that those that interacted with me or others like me had, came from really discovering who we were and being able to share with each other who we were, why we thought the way we thought. And although it wasn't like year-long relationship, sometimes it was only days or hours, it gave such satisfaction. And I really felt that the root cause is, human beings are at the source of every system that's created on the face of this earth. Really are, with the exception of things that are happening in the natural world, right? Other sentient beings, animals, plants, etc. But when humans build something, it inherently has a consciousness of the person that built it. And so part of it for me was how to address the consciousness of the person that's going to create a workshop, that's going to create a process for their team, that's going to be managing people or going to be managing certain expectations, that's going to put together certain brands and create tools and resources for people to use, people of all different walks of life, without having had an opportunity to really get conscious about their own experiences and have a meaningful human experience first. So it was more about getting to the individual. And look, this is not only in terms of the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. I'll tell you this. I remember right before I left Hyatt, I was asked to come to do a learning conference and to be the speaker. Now, my time with Hyatt ended. They reorganized the organization's learning department. They got rid of the learning department. So I took the severance package. And 10 days later, I was scheduled to go to this learning conference, which I thought, okay, this would be a great opportunity to network and to see what other people are doing in other companies. And Amy, I remember going to all of the workshops and the keynotes, and it was like a 3-day conference. And I sat there in my chair oftentimes and I said, no, this isn't it. Nope, that's not it. We were talking about employee engagement. They were talking about learning systems. They were talking about retention. And I was like, I worked for Hyatt 14 years and I'm like, we're still having this conversation? There's got to be more to it because everything I've heard here has been done, is being done. So that must be a symptom that we're dealing with if it's not changing. And that was my cue that my life, the rest of my career, my energy would have to really be directed to getting to the root of what it means to be human. And not in the scientific frame of mind, but really the spiritual, coming from the spiritual, but doing it in such a way that was not threatening or that was not confusing, right? Because I know sometimes that word can be loaded in a corporate environment. That's really been the drive. And look, I'm clear. Most of the stuff that I get doesn't come from me. The intuition that I have is like Marianne Williamson likes to say, I'm the faucet. I'm not the water. So my job is to be aligned.
I love that.
My job is to pay attention. My job is to find my own joy and then use that as be the mouthpiece for this deeper message. Not sure I answered your question, but.
No, you did. It's where would you have me go? What would you have me do?
Yes.
Yes. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I ask every guest that joins the Create Magic at Work podcast to share what they feel their definition of servant leadership is. So, Valerie, what do you think servant leadership is?
Servant leadership. It's funny. I just recorded a podcast myself with a couple of dynamo women who are highly spiritually intelligent. And we talked specifically about this, and both of them coming from a Christian faith predominantly. So one of them said, Jesus is the ultimate servant leader because, he washed other people's feet. He was there to heal. He was there to feed. He wasn't there to just give speeches or hold positions of power. And so I think using that as an example, and it doesn't have to be just because as a Christian, from a Christian context, but I think the idea of all of us are here as extras in someone else's play. Mm-hmm. Each of us are protagonists of our lives, but we're also extras in someone else's lives. And all the extras, even if you watch a movie, have their role. It would be weird if you just had an action movie with only the protagonists, the lead characters be the only people in the scene the entire 2 hours. Right. You need the people in the background riding the scooter or having a coffee, in the cafe. You need all the people around us. So I think for me, servant leadership is really about knowing when to be the protagonist and when to be the extra, and that the extra also has a role, that our role is oftentimes to enhance, support, highlight, get out of the way, or protect the integrity of other people's experiences. And I don't know, this sounds like a very convoluted answer to a simple question, but I don't know if I have a simple answer for it.
No, that was such a unique answer because I think a lot of people sometimes think that they're just the star in their own play. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good reminder that we are extras in other people's play, so to speak. And how can we support, exactly what you said, protect, support, get out of the way if need be. Beautifully said. Thank you.
Sure. I'm glad that made sense.
No, it was great. So final piece of the podcast is I pick a message meant for you and the audience from my journal prompt card deck. So we're going to give you a message today. It's going to be an affirmation. And then there's 2 questions for you to answer on the fly. So I got your card and it is inspiring others. I make it a point to deliver good news in the workplace. That's the affirmation. I make it a point to deliver good news in the workplace. Question: what are 3 positive ways you can celebrate your success with others? If you can think of that right now, Valerie, you can answer it.
What are 3 positive ways I celebrate my success with others?
Yes.
Well, I think definitely sharing with people the things that I'm doing that would benefit them. You know, if I have this happens to me all the time. If I do a particular podcast episode, for example, that I know, oh my goodness, this person talked about something that you would absolutely love. Amy, check it out. I would send it to you. So that's a way of celebrating my success too, right? But then also supporting someone else. Quality time is my love language, primary love language. And so I ask people to join me and do things that both of us would mutually enjoy. Like, for example, it doesn't necessarily point to a specific success, but I love taking classes and learning new things. But I remember asking my brothers, I have 3 brothers, but 2 of them live here close by. I asked them to join me in taking an improv class. It was so much fun. So doing things together that all of us can learn, and I get to share a piece of who I am, I think that's a way for me to celebrate. And are you asking for something specific to like right now or in general?
No, that was great. That was great. And I was going to ask you one more.
Oh. Is
there anybody you want to recognize in celebration of their contribution to your success?
Oh, there's so many people. I would say right now, my friend Felipe has been huge support. He and I worked for Hyatt for many years, and we've only met twice in person. He lives in Brazil. And in the last year and a half or so has been a good partner for me for the podcast that I'm doing. He also is a great thought partner whenever I have things in my mind that I'd like to just bounce off someone's head. But he is so committed to the message. And I so appreciate it because although it's something that I predominantly create, right? The interviews that I do, and he participates by creating some of the content, by facilitating some of the events that we have, and has been just such a wonderful partner to me. So I want to acknowledge him.
Yay, that's fantastic. I love this card because it says, I make it a point to deliver good news in the workplace. And it helps us pause and do that, because we get so caught up in the day-to-day needs of what needs to get done that we forget. And it's so crucial. It's such a crucial piece of staying connected and really understanding why we're here and part of being a servant leader. So thank you for acknowledging that.
I want to say one quick thing. So delivering good news in the workplace, tying it back to servant leadership, the good news has to be for the person that you're giving it to. All right. I think that's the key. Because one thing to say, oh, our 4th quarter earnings are through the roof. Good news, right? Yeah. Positive news. But for the person who has been, leaving their family and masking up or having to get the vaccine or having to be socially distant or working in ways that are uncomfortable or very different, having to make that sacrifice, the good news might be acknowledging the sacrifices that they're making or acknowledging the efforts that they've taken. Right? So it's not always about the result and the outcome. I think we often get lost in the positive news or good news being about something that was, rather than the experience of something, is like the outcome from having an experience. And I think especially nowadays, if we really want to serve and acknowledge the people around us, it behooves us to really notice what people are doing in order to not only survive for themselves, but also support other people in surviving, right? How they're extras in the companies that we run and lead, and acknowledging that, and that being the good news.
I love it. Tying it into the human connection definitely is going to impact as a leader in a super positive way. And you just got me thinking about while we're recording this in the United States, the Great Resignation is in the news, where literally millions of people have quit their job or moved on to something else, and they've sort of, coined it the Great Resignation. And even us as customers, when we shop at businesses, I remember I saw a meme or something on Instagram that said, hey, we're the ones that showed up today, so be kind. Because, there has been long waits at certain places. So we can deliver good news for the workplace just as patrons of businesses as well. Reviews, acknowledgement, and thank you for giving such great service and things like that. So I just wanted to add to that
100%.
What you said, because I had that thought. So thank you. Inspiring others. That's the key. Well, Valerie, thank you for joining Create Magic at Work. How can everyone reach out to you?
My website is probably the best way. Is the one size fits all catch-all place at www.valeriehope.com. And there you'll find all of my social media links. You'll see the podcast I've been referring to. You'll see any of my speaking and coaching engagements. Connect with me there.
Perfect. What's your favorite thing to do with your job right now?
My favorite
if someone's looking to hire you for something. Yeah, I'm just curious.
Everything I do is rooted or grounded in teaching others to be conscious, to be connected, and creative. So anything that covers those three things, and that shows up in the form of a workshop, it shows up in the form of a breakout group facilitation and one-on-one coaching. I mean, there's a lot of different ways in which I can do those three things, but those are my favorite. Being conscious of their own behaviors and attitudes and beliefs, being connected with others, supervisors, peers, customers, etc., and then creative, like really find ways to bring joy to life in their work.
Very good. I'm just going to add, because I wanted you to say that everyone should reach out to you to do a keynote speech at their company for inspiration.
Sure.
So I'm just going to throw it out there, and I'll put all the links for Valerie in the comments. But Valerie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with the Create Magic at Work audience. And I wish you much success in everything that you do.
Thank you for the invitation, Amy. It was a beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, it's Amy here. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Create Magic at Work. And please come back often and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Keep joining us for more exciting episodes where we help you transform workplace culture to systems that create less drama and stress and have high productivity and profitability. You can get your own tools for the workplace at createmagicatwork.net. I have a new Create Magic at Work, the journal, that just released, and it invites you to reflect about different themes for work in your career. Each section of the journal contains a topic, an affirmation, and 2 prompt questions to help you journal your thoughts. Topics are like inspiring others, mentorship, expansion, and productivity. So connect with me at createmagicatwork.net. Also connect with me on LinkedIn under Amy Lynn Durham. Sending magic to everyone, and see you next time.